When I was a child, I had a mother who loved Disney animated movies, and she made sure that she got me every Disney classic when they came out on VHS. I was also the child of a white mother and an Anishinaabe father. So when Disney's 1953 film Peter Pan came out on VHS in 1990, when I was almost 5, we got it and I saw these images for the first time. My father wasn't the most connected Anishinaabe man, so this was one of my first exposures to what I saw as historic Indians. A racist caricature of a generic, possibly Blackfoot, Plains culture. But what are we really looking at here? Were these images used here, and why did they hurt my self-esteem as a child? These images of Big Chief, as well as the depictions of most of the other Indians in Disney's Peter Pan, are a prime example of bloodthirsty or ignoble savages. This stereotype of the ignoble savage, described by Gileo Whitaker as wild beasts of the forest who were obstacles to progress, is on prime display here. Big Chief is ultra-violent, willing to burn the darlings and the lost boys at the stake, and his intelligence is portrayed as lacking by the way he speaks. Big Chief speaks in Tanto talk, adding at the end of words, which is a technique used to reflect low intelligence, according to Kilpatrick. The contrast to Big Chief and the other Indians is Tiger Lily, a literal Indian princess who here acts as a damsel in distress and another potential love interest for Peter. Tiger Lily isn't sexualized per se, but she is a noble maiden, as Bird would say, existing as a foil to the savages of her tribe. Why were these images used? To reinforce the narrative that Walt Disney and his production team on Peter Pan wanted to communicate about Indians. You see, the depiction of the Indians in Disney's Peter Pan strays a bit from J.M. Barrie's story, Peter and Wendy. In the original story, Tiger Lily's father is barely a character. His name is Great Big Little Panther, and he has but 2 mentions in the whole text. Instead, Tiger Lily has more agency here, being treated as the leader of the Pickaninny Indians. She's still captured, but she exists both before and after that as a leader of the Indians. It's Tiger Lily who pledges the Pickaninny to defend Peter and the Lost Boys after she's rescued. So why reduce Tiger Lily's role and invent a role for Big Chief? I can't say for certain, but the Western genre probably influenced how Disney wanted to portray the Indians, and by playing into the contemporary stereotypes, Disney is calling on the American mythology of what settlers perceive Indians to be to make them more familiar to the audience. So why did seeing these misrepresentations hurt my self-esteem? Because negative stereotypes hurt the self-image of indigenous people while also boosting the self-image of settler peoples, as Eason et al. Noted. They also observed that widely accessible ideas and representations about Native Americans fuel a cycle of bias and create disparate outcomes, specifically in the legal system, the media, and education. So these images, which bothered me as a child despite seeming benign by virtue of being in a children's cartoon, contributed to a culture that inherently disadvantaged indigenous peoples based on these negative representations. So what made the red man red? Settler colonialism did, and they used those stereotypes against us to justify genocide, land grabs, and culturicide. This is why these images of Indians from Peter Pan, which I was exposed to before age 5, hurt so much. It hurt my self-esteem because I could tell that we were being made fun of, but I didn't have the vocabulary to analyze it, so I internalized it instead. So a perfect storm of racist depictions of indigenous people by a Scotsman in the early 20th century which was further embellished and reshaped by Walt Disney and Company using tropes from the American mythology and the Western genre, resulted in an iconic depiction of the ignoble savage in animation that impacted the self-esteem of generations of indigenous children, including myself, who were exposed to this before they had the vocabulary to describe and analyze it. Ultimately, this image was so powerfully negative that even Disney was forced to acknowledge its problematic nature with a tepid warning at the beginning of the film when you play it on Disney+. That'll teach them all about racism.
Sometime we will.
Kill my